I stood outside the cemetery gates in Delaware, my heart slamming against my chest like it was trying to break free. Kathryn, my daughter-in-law, had just hit me with words that felt like a sledgehammer. "You're not welcome here, Gloria. You're not important to Dylan anymore." Her voice cut through me, sharp and cold, leaving me gasping for air. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't fathom that this was real. My son Dylan gone forever, and now this woman, his wife, was blocking me from saying goodbye. Me, his mother, who'd loved him through every single moment of his life. I wanted to scream, to shove her aside and storm into that service, but her eyes pinned me down, daring me to try. Behind her, mourners shuffled into Oakwood Cemetery, their heads bowed while I was stuck out here like some nobody. How did it get to this? How was I left standing alone on the wrong side of the gate? Before I dive into this story, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment with where you're watching from. Your support means everything. I'm Gloria, 68 years old, and this is the story of how my world got ripped apart in ways I never saw coming. It all started a week before that gut-punching day at the cemetery. Dylan had been sick for months, his illness tearing through him faster than we could handle. I was there every day in that hospital room, watching him slip away, holding his hand when the pain hit hard. Kathryn was around too, but it wasn't the same. She'd pop in, check her phone, give him a quick kiss on the forehead, and then leave for meetings or errands. At first I didn't think much of it. People deal with grief differently, right? But I started noticing things. She'd roll her eyes when I mentioned Dylan's childhood stories. She'd switch topics fast if I brought up his dreams, his laugh, his life before her. It hurt, but I kept my mouth shut. Dylan loved her, and I wanted to respect that, no matter how much it stung. When the end came, it was just me and Dylan in that cold hospital room. He was so weak, barely able to talk, but he grabbed my hand with a strength that surprised me. "Mom," he whispered, "don't let them forget me." I promised him I wouldn't, tears streaming down my face as I squeezed his hand back. I didn't fully understand who he meant by them, but his words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Kathryn wasn't there when he passed. She was out at some lunch with her friends. I called her, left voicemails, texted her over and over, but she didn't show up until hours later, her face blank, like she'd already checked out. That's when I felt the first real crack in my heart. I tried to tell myself she was just grieving her own way. I had to believe that, to keep going. The funeral planning kicked off the next day. I figured Kathryn and I would handle it together. Dylan was my son, her husband, so it made sense we'd share the load. I showed up at her house with a notebook full of ideas, hymns. He loved stories. I wanted to share maybe a slideshow of his life. But she barely glanced at me. "I've got this, Gloria," she said, her tone sharp, like I was overstepping. Dylan would want it my way. I was floored. Her way. What did that even mean? I tried to push back to suggest we include his favorite song or a poem from his old journal, but she just waved me off. "You don't get it," she snapped. "This is about who he was with me." I left her house that day, feeling like I'd been slapped across the face, but I didn't fight harder. I should have. Looking back, I should have stood my ground right then and there. The days after that were a blur of silence. Kathryn didn't call, didn't text, didn't share any details about the service. I reached out, left messages, but got nothing back. Finally, I got a text from her funeral Saturday, 10 a.m. Oakwood Cemetery. That was it. Cold short like I was. Some distant relative she barely knew. It hurt, but I told myself it didn't matter. I'd be there for Dylan no matter what. The night before I stayed up late, picking out a dress, ironing it carefully, writing a eulogy I hoped they'd let me read. I wanted to tell everyone about the boy who'd raced through our backyard, chasing fireflies, who'd dreamed of exploring space, who'd loved his family with every piece of his soul. I needed to say those things to keep him alive somehow. Saturday morning I drove to Oakwood Cemetery, my stomach twisted in knots. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked toward the entrance. That's when I saw her, Kathryn, standing at the gate, like she was guarding a fortress. She was dressed in black, her hair perfect, her face set in a way that made my blood run cold. Before I could say a word, she stepped forward, her voice low but hard. "You're not coming in, Gloria. This is my day to honor Dylan. You don't belong here." I stared at her, my mouth open, trying to process what she was saying. "Kathryn," I said, my voice breaking, "he's my son. I have to be there." She didn't even blink. "You were his mother, but I was his wife. He chose me. You're not important anymore." Those words hit me like a punch, knocking the air out of me. Not important me. The woman who'd raised him, loved him through every high and low. I wanted to yell to demand she let me in, but my throat locked up. I could see people glancing at us from inside the cemetery, their whispers floating over the gate. I was humiliated, broken, standing there, like I didn't matter. I don't know how long I stood there, after she turned and walked away. Maybe minutes, maybe longer. My legs felt heavy, my heart torn to pieces. I could hear the faint sounds of the service starting, music, voices, a preacher's prayer, but I was shut out. I leaned against the gate, tears running down my face, trying to picture Dylan's smile, trying to hold on to him in my mind. I wanted to barge in to scream that this wasn't fair, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed there outside the cemetery, a mother robbed of her chance to say goodbye. People passed by, some avoiding my eyes, others offering quick sorry looks, but no one stopped. I was alone in a way I'd never felt before. That night, I went home to a house that felt too quiet. Dylan's old room was still there, untouched, since he'd moved out years ago. I sat on his bed, holding his high school yearbook, my fingers tracing his face in the photos. I kept hearing Kathryn's words over and over. "You're not important anymore." How could she say that? How could she believe it? I didn't sleep that night. My mind wouldn't stop racing, replaying every moment, every time I'd let Kathryn push me aside. I thought about the hospital, how she'd barely been there, how she'd acted like Dylan's past didn't matter. I should have fought harder. I should have demanded my place. But I didn't, and now I was paying for it. The next few days were torture. I couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. I kept seeing that gate in my mind, hearing her voice, feeling the weight of being locked out. I called my sister. Linda told her what happened. She was furious, wanted to drive to Kathryn's house and confront her right then. "She can't do this, Gloria," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "He was your son." I begged her to stay out of it. I didn't want to fight, not yet. I wasn't ready. But Linda wouldn't let it go. She kept checking on me, bringing me food, making sure I wasn't alone. She was my rock, but even she couldn't fix the hole in my heart. I tried to reach out to Kathryn one more time. I sent her a text asking if we could talk about the funeral, about Dylan. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to understand. She didn't respond. Not a word. That silence was louder than anything she could have said. It told me she didn't care, didn't feel a shred of guilt for what she'd done. I started wondering if she'd planned it all along, if she'd wanted me out of the picture from the start. The thought made me sick, but it also lit a spark in me. I wasn't going to let her erase me from Dylan's life. I couldn't. A week after the funeral, I was in the attic, looking for anything to feel close to Dylan. I was going through old boxes of his things, comic books, report cards, a baseball glove he'd loved as a kid. That's when I found it tucked inside a book he used to read over and over. A handwritten letter in his messy scrawl, dated a month before he passed. I unfolded it, my hands shaking as I read. "If I go first, don't let them shut you out, Mom. You're my heart. If there's a service, make sure you're front row. You deserve that. I love you always, Dylan." I broke down right there on the attic floor, clutching the letter like it was him. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known they'd try to push me away. And he'd left me this. His words, his love, his fight. I read the letter again and again, letting it sink in. It was like Dylan was speaking to me, telling me not to give up. I wasn't done. Kathryn thought she'd won, thought she could rewrite Dylan's story to make herself the only one who mattered. But she didn't know about the letter. She didn't know I was about to push back. I folded the paper carefully, tucked it into my pocket, and made a decision. I wasn't going to stay silent. I was going to fight for my son, for his truth, for the place he'd wanted me to have. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this was just the beginning. The letter gave me a purpose, a fire I hadn't felt since that day at the gate. I called Linda that night, told her what I'd found. "Oh, Gloria," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That's him. That's Dylan looking out for you." I told her I wanted to do something, to make sure everyone knew the truth. Not just about the funeral, but about who Dylan was. Linda was all in. "Whatever you need," she said. "Let's do this for him." I went to bed that night, still hurting, but with a plan forming. I was going to take back what Kathryn had stolen. I was going to make sure Dylan's voice was heard. The next morning, I started reaching out to people, Dylan's friends, his coworkers, anyone who'd known him. I wanted to know who'd been at the funeral, who Kathryn had invited, who she'd left out. What I found out made my blood boil. She'd only invited her friends, her family, a few of Dylan's colleagues she liked. Most of his old friends, people who'd known him for years, hadn't even been told about the service. One of his best friends, Mike, called me back in tears. "Gloria, I would have been there," he said. "Why didn't she tell me?" I didn't have an answer, just a growing anger. Kathryn hadn't just shut me out. She'd shut out everyone who'd loved Dylan before her. I decided I needed to see the funeral program to know exactly what she'd done. I called the funeral home, explained who I was, asked if they could send me a copy. The woman on the phone was kind, said she'd mail it to me. When it arrived a few days later, I sat at my kitchen table and opened it. My heart sank. It was all Kathryn. The songs were ones she liked, not Dylan. The readings were generic, nothing personal. There was a photo of them together on the cover, but none of Dylan's childhood, none of his life with me. It was like she'd erased everything that wasn't her. I closed the program, pushed it away, and felt that fire in me grow stronger. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I started thinking about what I could do to set things right. The letter was my weapon, but I needed a plan. I didn't want to just confront Kathryn. She'd twist it, make me look like the bad guy. I needed something bigger, something that would show everyone who Dylan really was. I thought about his life, the people he'd touched, the community he'd been part of. That's when it hit me, a memorial. A real one, not Kathryn's fake version. I'd hold it at the community center, where Dylan used to volunteer, a place he loved. I'd invite everyone she'd left out, and I'd read his letter, let his words speak for him. It felt right, like something he'd want. I called Linda again, told her my idea. She was on board immediately. "Let's make it big," she said. "Let's fill that place with love for Dylan." We started planning right away, booking the community center, picking a date, reaching out to people. I spent hours making calls, sending messages, tracking down anyone who'd known my son. The response was overwhelming. People wanted to help, wanted to be there. It gave me hope, but it also made me nervous. What if Kathryn found out? What if she tried to stop it? I pushed the fear aside. This was for Dylan. I wasn't going to let her scare me off. By the end of the week, we had a plan. The memorial would be the following Saturday at the community center. I'd speak, share stories about Dylan, read his letter. Others could share too. Anyone who wanted to talk about him. I wanted it to be a celebration of his life, not just a goodbye. I stayed up late every night, working on my speech, trying to find the right words. I didn't want to make it about Kathryn, didn't want to turn it into a fight. But I also couldn't ignore what she'd done. The letter would say it for me. I'd let Dylan's words do the heavy lifting. The days leading up to the memorial were hectic, but they kept me going. Linda and I went to the community center early to set up. We brought photos of Dylan, his old basketball jersey, a playlist of his favorite songs. I kept the letter in my purse, touching it every now and then to remind myself why I was doing this. By Friday, everything was ready. People were RSVPing more than I'd expected. I was nervous, but also excited. This was my chance to give Dylan the farewell he deserved. I just hoped I was strong enough to see it through. Finding Dylan's letter was like a lightning bolt straight to my soul. For a week, I'd been suffocating under the weight of grief and humiliation, replaying that moment at the cemetery gate, where Kathryn had torn my place in Dylan's life to shreds. But now I had his words right there in my hands, his voice telling me I was his heart, telling me to fight back. I sat in that dusty attic surrounded by boxes of his old toys and books, reading the letter over and over until it was burned into my brain. If I go first, don't let them shut you out, Mom. You're my heart. If there's a service, make sure you're front row. You deserve that. I love you always, Dylan. I wasn't going to let Kathryn steal that from me. Not anymore. I wiped my tears, folded the letter with care, and started planning. I was going to make sure everyone knew who Dylan really was and what he wanted. I called my sister Linda the next morning, my voice steadier than it had been in days. She'd been at the funeral, one of the few who saw me standing outside that gate like some forgotten stranger. She was furious when I told her what Kathryn did, but I'd begged her to stay quiet that day. I wasn't ready for a fight then. Now, though, I needed her strength. Linda, I found something, I said, gripping the phone tight. Dylan left a letter. I need your help to make this right. She didn't even pause. Whatever you need, Gloria, I'm in. We met at her house that afternoon, and I showed her the letter. Her eyes filled with tears as she read it, her fingers tracing Dylan's handwriting. That's our Dylan, she said, her voice thick. Always looking out for you. What's the plan? I didn't want to just march up to Kathryn and shove the letter in her face. That wouldn't be enough. She'd spin it, make me look like the bitter old mother-in-law out for revenge. No, I wanted everyone to know the truth. Dylan's friends, his coworkers, the whole Delaware community that showed up to mourn him. I decided to hold a memorial of my own, a real one that celebrated Dylan's life, not Kathryn's twisted version of it. I'd read his letter there, let his words speak loud and clear. Linda suggested the community center, where Dylan used to volunteer. It was perfect. He'd loved that place. Spent years helping kids with homework, teaching them basketball, running summer camps. I called the manager that same day, booked the space for the following Saturday, and got to work. Planning the memorial gave me a purpose, something to hold on to when the pain threatened to swallow me whole. I started reaching out to Dylan's old friends, people Kathryn hadn't bothered to invite to her cold funeral. I called his high school coach, his college roommate, even the barista at the coffee shop he went to every morning. They all said the same thing: Kathryn never told us about the funeral. We would have been there. That hit me hard, but it also fueled my fire. She'd handpicked who got to say goodbye, made it about her, not him. I wasn't going to let her control Dylan's legacy. I printed flyers, created a Facebook event, sent texts and emails to everyone I could think of. I wanted that room packed with people who loved Dylan, not just Kathryn's social circle. The hardest part was figuring out what to say. I didn't want this to turn into a war. This was about Dylan, not about dragging Kathryn through the mud. But I couldn't ignore what she'd done either. I spent hours at my kitchen table, writing my speech, trying to balance my anger with my love for my son. I wanted people to know the truth, that Dylan had wanted me there, that he'd seen this coming. The letter would be my anchor. I'd read it, let it do the heavy lifting. But I also wanted to share stories about him, the ones Kathryn had buried. Like the time he spent all night helping a neighbor rebuild their porch after a storm, or how he'd call me every Sunday to talk about nothing and everything. Those were the pieces of Dylan I needed people to remember. I didn't stop with just the speech. I wanted the memorial to feel like Dylan, like he was there with us. I dug through old boxes, found photos from his childhood, him grinning at his 5th birthday party, him in his basketball uniform, him hugging me at his college graduation. I made copies to display around the room. I put together a playlist of his favorite songs, Springsteen, some old rap he loved, a few country tracks he'd play on road trips. Linda helped me plan a slideshow, videos and pictures from his life looping on a screen. We even set up a table for people to write memories of Dylan, to share what he meant to them. Every detail mattered. This wasn't just a memorial. It was a fight to keep Dylan's spirit alive. By Friday, the community center was ready. Linda and I spent the day setting up hanging photos, pinning up Dylan's old basketball jersey, arranging chairs for what we hoped would be a big crowd. The slideshow played on a loop, Dylan's laugh echoing through the room from an old video. People started RSVPing more than I expected. Friends I hadn't seen in years, Coworkers, neighbors, even a teacher from Dylan's middle school. I was nervous, but determined. This was my chance to take back what Kathryn had stolen. I kept the letter in my purse, touching it every now and then to remind myself why I was doing this. Dylan's words were my strength, my shield. Saturday morning came, and the community center filled up fast. There were faces I hadn't seen in forever. Dylan's old teammates, his childhood best friend, Mike, even his boss, from his first job at the hardware store. They hugged me, shared stories, laughed, and cried. It felt like Dylan was there with us, his spirit filling every corner of that room. But I was also on edge, waiting for Kathryn. I hadn't invited her directly, but Delaware's a small place, and word travels fast. Part of me wanted her to show up to see what a real tribute to Dylan looked like. Part of me dreaded the drama she'd bring. I pushed the thought aside, focused on the people who were there for him. The memorial started at noon. I stood at the front of the room, my hands gripping the podium, my stomach in knots. "Thank you all for being here," I said, my voice shaking just a little. "This is for Dylan. For who he was to all of us." I started with stories, his goofy laugh that could light up a room, his stubborn streak that drove me crazy, his heart that was always too big for his own good. People nodded, smiled, wiped tears from their eyes. Then I pulled out the letter. "Before I go on," I said, "there's something Dylan left for me. I want you to hear it in his words." I unfolded the paper, my hands steady now, and read, "If I go first, don't let them shut you out, Mom. You're my heart. If there's a service, make sure you're front row. You deserve that. I love you always, Dylan." The room went still, everyone leaning forward, hanging on every word. I looked up, saw tears, saw anger too. They knew what had happened at the funeral. They'd heard the whispers. I didn't name Kathryn. I didn't have to. The letter said it all. I finished my speech, shared a few more memories, then opened the floor for others. One by one, people stood up, telling stories about Dylan that made us laugh and cry all over again. Mike talked about their late-night road trips, how Dylan would sing off-key to every song on the radio. His coach shared how Dylan rallied the team after a tough loss, always the one to lift everyone up. A neighbor told a story about Dylan shoveling her driveway during a blizzard, refusing to take a dime for it. It was beautiful, painful, perfect. For the first time since he'd gone, I felt like I was honoring him the way he deserved. Then she walked in. Kathryn. She stood at the back of the room, her arms crossed her face, a mask I couldn't read. The air shifted, everyone noticing her, but no one saying a word. I froze for a second, my heart pounding in my chest. Was she going to make a scene? Was she going to try to take this from me too? I kept going. Let someone else share their story, but I could feel her eyes burning into me. When the speeches ended, I walked toward her, my pulse racing, but my steps steady. "Kathryn," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This was for Dylan. I hope you felt him here." She didn't answer right away, just stared at me, her lips pressed tight. Then, she said, "You had no right to do this. This was my place, not yours." I didn't back down. "Dylan wanted me here," I said, holding up the letter. "He made that clear." She flinched like I'd struck her, then turned and walked out without another word. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The room was still buzzing with emotion, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd done it. I'd honored my son. The memorial didn't end there. People stayed for hours, talking, sharing more stories, writing memories on the cards we'd set out. Some left flowers by Dylan's jersey. Others added photos to the display. It was like the community was wrapping itself around him, around me. I walked around the room, listening, hugging people, thanking them for coming. Mike pulled me aside at one point, his eyes red. "Gloria, this is what Dylan would have wanted," he said. "Not that funeral. This?" I nodded, tears in my eyes. "I know," I said. "I just wish he could see it." As the day wound down, I started hearing whispers. People were talking about Kathryn, about what she'd done at the funeral. Some were angry, said she had no right to shut me out. Others were just sad, said they didn't understand why she'd do something so cruel. I didn't join in. I didn't want to make this about her. But I couldn't help feeling a spark of satisfaction. The truth was out there now. People knew what she'd done, and they knew what Dylan wanted. The letter had done its job. That night I went home exhausted but lighter. I sat on my couch, the letter in my hands, reading it one more time before bed. I thought about the memorial, the faces, the stories. It was everything I'd hoped for and more. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Kathryn's reaction at the community center told me she wasn't going to let this go. She'd walked out, but I could feel her anger lingering like a storm cloud. I didn't know what she'd do next, but I was ready. Dylan's words were my armor now. I wasn't going to let her silence me again. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages. Friends, neighbors, people who'd been at the memorial, texting, calling, emailing, to say how much it meant to them. Some shared more stories about Dylan, things I'd never heard before. Like how he'd helped a coworker fix her car when she couldn't afford a mechanic, or how he'd spent a whole weekend painting a mural with kids at the community center. Every story was a piece of him, a reminder of why I was fighting. But there was something else in those messages too. People were talking about Kathryn. They'd seen her at the memorial, seen her walk out. They were starting to question her, to wonder why she'd tried to erase so much of Dylan's life. I decided to keep the momentum going. I didn't want the memorial to be a one-time thing. I started thinking about ways to keep Dylan's memory alive, not just for me, but for everyone. I called the community center manager, asked if we could do something permanent, a plaque maybe, or a fund in Dylan's name. She loved the idea, said they'd been thinking about renaming the basketball court after him. I was floored. Dylan's court. It felt so right. We set up a meeting to talk details, and I started reaching out to his friends to get them involved. I wanted this to be a community effort, something that would last. But even as I planned, I couldn't shake the feeling that Kathryn was watching, waiting. I didn't hear from her directly, but I knew she'd heard about the memorial. I knew she'd seen the flyers, the Facebook posts. I wondered what she was thinking, if she was planning something to hit back. Part of me wanted to reach out to try to talk to her one more time. Maybe if she saw the letter, if she heard Dylan's words, she'd back off. But deep down I knew better. Kathryn didn't want the truth. She wanted control. And I wasn't going to give it to her. By the end of the week, the community center was buzzing with ideas for Dylan's court. People were donating money, offering to help with the renovation. It was overwhelming, but it kept me going. I started working on a new speech for the dedication. Something short, but meaningful. I wanted to read the letter again. Let it be part of this new chapter. I also started collecting more stories from people, scanning photos to add to a permanent display. Every step felt like a victory, a way to keep Dylan's light shining. But I wasn't naive. I knew Kathryn wouldn't stay quiet forever. She'd lost her grip on the narrative, and she wasn't the type to let that go. I kept the letter close, always in my purse or on my nightstand. It was my proof, my strength. Whatever she did next, I'd be ready. Dylan had given me his voice, and I was going to use it. Kathryn's stormy exit from the memorial didn't wrap things up like I'd hoped. If anything, it was like tossing a match into dry grass. I thought maybe the letter and the memorial would be enough to set things right, to give Dylan the farewell he deserved, and maybe even make Kathryn see the weight of what she'd done. But she wasn't backing down. The very next day, my phone rang, and it was a lawyer. Her lawyer. His voice was slick, too polished for my liking, telling me Kathryn was considering legal action. For what defamation, he said. Emotional distress. I nearly choked. Emotional distress. She was the one who'd barred me from my son's funeral, who'd humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. But I didn't laugh it off. I was scared. I'm 68, living on a fixed income. A lawsuit could wipe me out. I hung up the phone, my heart racing, and called Linda right away. She's coming for me, I said, my voice tight. She's not letting this go. Linda was spitting mad. She's bluffing, Gloria, she said, her words sharp with conviction. She's just mad because you showed everyone the truth. We're not letting her scare you. She was right. but the fear still gnawed at me. I kept thinking about Dylan's letter, his words telling me to stand my ground. He'd wanted me to fight, and I wasn't going to stop now. I decided to get ahead of this mess. I called a lawyer of my own, a guy named Mark, who'd been Dylan's friend in college and went on to law school. He agreed to meet me that afternoon at a coffee shop in town. I brought the letter, laid out everything Kathryn's actions, at the funeral, the memorial, her lawyer's call. Mark listened, his face serious, but calm. "Gloria, she doesn't have a case," he said, leaning forward. "Defamation. She'd have to prove you lied, and that letter's proof you didn't. But we need to be smart. She's trying to bully you into silence." Mark suggested we go public, not in some dramatic showdown, but enough to show we weren't afraid. He recommended sharing the letter with a local newspaper. "People need to know what happened," he said. "It's not just about you. It's about Dylan's memory." I wasn't sure at first. I didn't want this to turn into a soap opera. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Kathryn had controlled the story for too long. I wanted people to hear Dylan's voice, not hers. I gave Mark the go-ahead, and he reached out to a reporter he knew at the Delaware Gazette. Her name was Sarah, and she was interested right away. "This is a story about family and truth," she said. When we talked on the phone, "Let's tell it right." Sarah came to my house the next day with a notepad and a recorder, her demeanor kind but focused. I told her everything, starting with that awful day at the cemetery gate. I showed her the letter, let her take pictures of it. I talked about Dylan, who he was, what he meant to me, to so many people. It was hard reliving it all, but it felt necessary, like I was fighting for him. Sarah asked tough questions, but she wasn't pushy. "What do you want people to take from this?" she asked at one point. I thought for a second, then said, "I want them to know Dylan loved his family. All of us. And I want them to know no one gets to erase that." She nodded, scribbled it down. The article came out 2 days later, front page of the local section, "Mother barred from son's funeral, fights for his legacy." It included a photo of the letter, Dylan's words clear for everyone to see. The response was like a tidal wave. People called, emailed, showed up at my doorstep, with flowers and hugs. They were angry for me for Dylan. Some shared their own stories about being pushed out by in-laws or family members during tough times. Others just wanted to say they remembered Dylan, how kind he was, how he'd touched their lives. It was healing, in a way I hadn't expected, like the community was wrapping its arms around me. But it also stirred up trouble. Kathryn didn't stay quiet. She posted on Facebook a long, rambling post about how I'd hijacked Dylan's memory, how I was spreading lies to make her look bad. She didn't mention the letter, didn't mention what she'd done at the funeral. Just painted herself as the victim. I was furious, but Mark told me to stay calm. "Let her dig her own hole," he said. "The truth's on your side." Things took a turn when Kathryn showed up at my house unannounced. It was a Sunday morning, and I was sipping coffee, trying to enjoy a quiet moment. The doorbell rang, and there she was, her face red, her eyes wild like she hadn't slept. "You think you can ruin me?" she shouted, before I could even say hello. "You think that letter changes anything?" I stepped back, my heart pounding. "Kathryn, this isn't about you," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's about Dylan." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "You're pathetic, Gloria. He was my husband. Mine. Not yours." I wanted to slam the door in her face, but I held my ground. "He was my son," I said. "And he wanted me there. You can't change that." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing, then turned and stormed off. I closed the door, my knees weak, but my resolve stronger than ever. This wasn't over. The next week was a whirlwind. The article spread online. People shared it, commented on it. Some took Kathryn's side, said I was stirring up drama for no reason. But most were with me, especially after they read the letter. I got a call from a local television station, asking for an interview. I was hesitant, my stomach churning at the thought of being on camera. But Linda pushed me. "Do it for Dylan," she said, her voice firm. So I did. I sat in a studio with bright lights, A reporter asking me about the funeral, the letter, the memorial. I told the truth, didn't hold back. I cried when I talked about Dylan. Read his letter on air, my voice breaking but steady. The reporter was kind, but didn't shy away from hard questions. "What do you want from Kathryn?" she asked. I paused, then answered. "I want her to admit what she did. I want her to stop pretending Dylan was only hers." The interview aired that night, and the response was even bigger than the article. People were talking not just in Delaware, but beyond our little town. Kathryn's lawyer called again a few days later, his tone different this time, less cocky. "My client is willing to drop the lawsuit," he said, "if you stop talking to the media." I almost laughed out loud. Stop talking. After everything she'd done, I told Mark about the call, and he shook his head, a small smile on his face. "She's scared," he said. "She knows she's losing." We decided to keep going. I wasn't trying to destroy Kathryn. I just wanted the truth out there, plain and simple. But she wasn't making it easy. She kept posting online, doubling down, calling me a liar, a manipulator. It stung, but I didn't respond. I let Dylan's letter do the talking, kept my focus on honoring him. The media attention brought more people into my corner. I started getting letters from strangers, cards with kind words, even small donations to the community center in Dylan's name. A local pastor reached out, asked if I'd speak at a service about family and loss. I wasn't sure I had it in me, but I said yes. The church was packed that Sunday, people I didn't even know filling the pews. I shared a story about Dylan helping a kid at the community center learn to read, how he'd spend hours after his shift just to make sure the kid didn't fall behind. I read the letter again. Let Dylan's words fill the room. People came up to me, after hugged me, said they were praying for me. It was overwhelming, but it gave me strength. Meanwhile, Kathryn's posts were getting more desperate. She started sharing old photos of her and Dylan, captions about how they were soulmates, how no one understood their love. She was trying to rewrite the story, make it seem like Dylan's life began and ended with her. It made me sick, but I didn't take the bait. Mark kept an eye on her posts, saved screenshots in case we needed them later. "She's building a house of cards," he said. "It's going to collapse." I hoped he was right, but I wasn't counting on it. Kathryn was slippery, and she wasn't going to go down without a fight. I decided to lean into the community's support. I started meeting with people who'd reached out, friends of Dylan's neighbors, even a few of Kathryn's acquaintances who'd started to question her story. One woman, Tara, used to be close with Kathryn, but said she'd pulled away after the funeral. "I saw you outside the cemetery," she told me over coffee, her voice low. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't say anything. I should have. I thanked her, told her it wasn't her fault. She hesitated, then said, "Kathryn's been talking. She's saying you're obsessed with Dylan, that you're making it all up." I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. Obsessed, I was his mother. Of course I loved him. But I didn't argue. I just asked Tara to keep me posted if she heard anything else. The community center became my anchor. I started volunteering there more, helping with the kids' programs Dylan used to run. It felt good to be in a place he loved, to see his spirit in the kids playing basketball or reading in the library. The manager kept me updated on the plans for Dylan's court. They were moving fast, raising money, planning a big dedication. I threw myself into it, helped organize meetings, reached out to donors. It was exhausting, but it kept me grounded. Every time I felt overwhelmed, I'd touch the letter in my purse, remind myself why I was doing this. Then came a new twist. A friend of Dylan's from work called me, said he'd found something in email Dylan sent him a few months before he passed. In it, Dylan talked about his illness, how he was worried about me, about how things might go after he was gone. "Tell my mom I love her," he wrote. "Make sure she's okay." I cried when I read it, not just for the pain, but for the love. It was another piece of him, another reminder that he'd been thinking of me. I shared the email with Sarah at the Gazette, asked if she could include it in a follow-up story. She did, and the article hit even harder than the first. People were calling Kathryn out now, not just in private, but online and public. The tide was turning. But Kathryn wasn't done. I got a text from an unknown number late one night. "You're tearing his memory apart. Stop or you'll regret it." No name, but I knew it was her. I showed it to Mark, and he frowned. "This is harassment," he said. "We could use this." I didn't want to escalate things, but I was tired of her threats. I told Mark to keep it on file, but not to act yet. I wanted to focus on the positive, on Dylan's court, on the community coming together. But I was also preparing myself. Kathryn was cornered, and cornered people do desperate things. By the end of the month, the plans for Dylan's court were in full swing. The community center had raised thousands of dollars, enough to renovate the court and add a new scoreboard. They asked me to speak at the dedication, to read Dylan's letter one more time. I said yes, but I was nervous. Not just about speaking, but about Kathryn. I knew she'd hear about it. I knew she'd try something. I just didn't know what. I kept moving forward, planned my speech, helped organize the event. The community was behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was far from over. The media storm turned everything upside down. Suddenly, I wasn't just Gloria, the grieving mother. I was a story, a cause people rallied behind. Strangers sent me letters, cards, flowers, even baked goods, just to show they cared. A local church reached out, organized a vigil for Dylan, not just for him, but for all the families torn apart by grief and conflict. I was overwhelmed, but grateful. It felt like Dylan's spirit was alive in all this love, this support. But I also knew Kathryn wasn't done. She'd gone quiet online after her last desperate posts, but I could feel her out there watching, waiting for a chance to strike back. I wasn't going to let my guard down. The vigil was held at the community center, the same place as the memorial. Hundreds showed up, way more than I'd ever imagined. They brought candles, photos of loved ones. They'd lost, stories they wanted to share. I spoke briefly, told a story about Dylan teaching a kid to ride a bike, how he'd stayed out there for hours in the summer heat, until the kid got it right. People smiled, nodded, some cried. Then, others shared their stories, not just about loss, but about being pushed out, sidelined by family members who thought they had the right to control everything. It was powerful hearing how many people understood my pain. I felt less alone, like I was part of something bigger. One woman talked about her sister shutting her out of their father's funeral. Another man shared how his in-laws tried to erase his role in his wife's life. We stood there holding candles, the light flickering in the darkening room, and I felt Dylan with us. After the vigil, a woman approached me. Her name was Ellen, and she said she'd known Dylan through work. "He talked about you all the time," she said, her voice soft. "He'd tell us stories about your Sunday dinners, how you'd make his favorite lasagna." I smiled, tears welling up. "He loved those dinners," I said, my voice catching. Then Ellen leaned in, her expression shifting. "Kathryn's been talking to people," she said. "She's saying, you forged the letter, that Dylan never wrote it." My stomach dropped. Forged it. The idea was so ridiculous, it almost made me laugh, but it also scared me. If people believed her, it could unravel everything I'd done. I thanked Ellen, promised to handle it, and went home that night with a new fire in my chest. Kathryn wasn't going to rewrite Dylan's truth. Not on my watch. I called Mark the next morning, told him what Ellen said. He was calm but firm. "We need to authenticate the letter," he said. "Get it analyzed. Prove it's Dylan's handwriting." I hadn't even thought of that, but it made sense. Kathryn was desperate, trying to claw back control. I took the letter to a handwriting expert in Wilmington, someone Mark recommended. Her name was Dr. Patel, and she was thorough. She compared the letter to other samples of Dylan's writing, old birthday cards, a grocery list he'd left at my house, a note he'd written me years ago. It took a week, but she called me with the results. "It's a match," she said, her voice confident. "No question. The letter is genuine." I felt a wave of relief, but also a surge of anger. Kathryn thought she could lie her way out of this, but she was wrong. I had proof now. Undeniable proof. Armed with Dr. Patel's report, I went back to Sarah at the Delaware Gazette. She was eager to write a follow-up article, Mother's Fight Continues, as letter proved authentic. It included quotes from Dr. Az Patel, photos of the handwriting samples, even a side-by-side comparison of Dylan's writing. The article spread like wildfire. People were outraged, calling Kathryn out online in letters to the editor, even on local radio shows. A station invited me to talk about it, and I was nervous, but I said yes. I sat in their studio, my hands sweaty, told the story again, read the letter, shared what Dr. Patel found. The host didn't hold back. "Why do you think Kathryn's doing this?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "She wants to control Dylan's story," I said. "But she can't." He spoke for himself. The show aired, and the response was huge. People were done with Kathryn's lies. The community's support grew stronger every day. A group of Dylan's friends came to me with an idea, a scholarship in his name for kids at the community center. They wanted to help kids like the ones Dylan used to mentor kids who needed a boost to chase their dreams. I was floored. It was perfect. They asked me to be part of it, to help choose the recipients. I said yes right away, feeling like this was another piece of Dylan's legacy coming to life. We set up meetings, started planning how to fund it, how to make it sustainable. People donated money, time, ideas. It was like the whole town was coming together to keep Dylan's spirit alive. But Kathryn didn't stay silent. She sent me a letter, not through her lawyer, but in her own handwriting. It arrived in my mailbox, a plain envelope with my name scrawled on it. I opened it, my heart pounding. It was short, cold. "You've made your point, Gloria. Let it go." No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just a demand to stop. I showed it to Mark, and he shook his head. "She's still trying to control you," he said. I tore the letter up, threw it in the trash. I wasn't stopping. Not for her, not for anyone. Dylan's letter was my guide, and I was following it to the end. Then came the fundraiser. The community center wanted to renovate the basketball court, where Dylan had volunteered, dedicate it to him. They called it Dylan's Court, and asked me to help organize a big event to raise the money. I threw myself into it, planning a charity basketball game, a bake sale, a silent auction. The whole town got involved, donating items, volunteering their time, spreading the word. Businesses offered gift cards. Local artists donated paintings. Even kids from the center made crafts to sell. It was exhausting, but it kept me going. I wanted this to be big, to show the world who Dylan was. We set the event for a Saturday, expected a huge turnout. I was nervous not just about the logistics, but about Kathryn. Would she show up? Would she try to ruin it? I didn't know, but I was ready. The days leading up to the fundraiser were a blur. I was at the community center every day, coordinating with volunteers, setting up tables, making calls to confirm donations. Linda was there too, helping with everything from baking cookies to hanging banners. We put up posters all over town, shared the event on social media, got the local paper to run a story about it. People were excited, talking about Dylan, sharing memories online. It felt like the community was coming together in a way I'd never seen before. But I also kept an eye out for Kathryn. I hadn't heard from her since the letter, but I knew she'd hear about the fundraiser. I knew she'd have something to say. The day of the fundraiser was sunny, perfect. The community center was packed with people, families, kids, Dylan's old teammates, even folks from out of town who'd heard about it. The basketball game was a hit, with local players facing off in a friendly match. The bake sale sold out in hours. The silent auction raised thousands, with people bidding on everything from spa packages to handmade quilts. I stood at the edge of the court, watching it all, my heart full. This was for Dylan. This was his legacy. I spoke briefly before the game, thanked everyone for coming, read a short excerpt from Dylan's letter. People clapped, some cried, but everyone was there for him. It was everything I'd hoped for. Then I saw her, Kathryn, standing near the bleachers, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. My stomach tightened, but I didn't approach her. Let her see this, I thought. Let her see what love looks like. She didn't stay long, just watched for a few minutes, her eyes scanning the crowd, then left without a word. I don't know what she was thinking, but I didn't care. This wasn't about her anymore. The fundraiser went on without a hitch, raising more money than we'd dreamed. The community center announced they'd start renovations on the court the next month, with a dedication ceremony to follow. They asked me to speak at that too, to read the letter one more time. I said yes, feeling like every step was bringing Dylan's memory into sharper focus. After the fundraiser, people kept talking about Dylan. The scholarship fund grew with donations coming in from people I'd never met. A local school reached out, asked if they could name their volunteer award after him. I was stunned, but said yes, right away. It was like Dylan's light was spreading, touching more lives than I'd ever imagined. But I also knew Kathryn was still out there. Her silence, after the fundraiser, felt too quiet, like the calm before a storm. I kept the letter close, kept working with the community center, kept telling Dylan's story, but I was always watching, waiting for her next move. The community center became my second home. I volunteered more, helped with the kids' programs Dylan used to love. I'd sit in the gym, sometimes watching the kids play basketball, picturing Dylan out there with them. It hurt, but it also healed me. The manager kept me updated on the court renovations, showed me plans for the new scoreboard, the plaque with Dylan's name. They wanted to include a quote from his letter. "You're my heart." I loved that. It was him, pure and simple. We started planning the dedication ceremony, invited the whole town. I knew it would be big, emotional, maybe even a target for Kathryn. But I wasn't going to let her stop us. I also kept in touch with Sarah at the Gazette. She was working on another article, this one, about the fundraiser and the scholarship. I gave her more stories about Dylan, things people had shared with me, like how he'd once spent a whole weekend helping a neighbor rebuild their fence after a storm, or how he'd always stop to talk to the homeless guy outside the coffee shop. She included those in the article, along with photos from the fundraiser. When it came out, it brought even more people to our side. The community was rallying, not just for Dylan, but for the idea that no one should be shut out of love like I was. But Kathryn's shadow loomed. I got a call from Tara, the friend who'd tipped me off before. She said Kathryn was telling people the fundraiser was a stunt, that I was using Dylan's memory to make myself look good. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung. Tara said some of Kathryn's friends were starting to pull away, tired of her lies. That gave me hope, but it also made me wary. Kathryn was losing allies, and that could make her desperate. I told Mark about it, and he nodded. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. "She's running out of moves." I hoped he was right, but I wasn't taking any chances. I kept pushing forward, kept building Dylan's legacy, kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. The fundraiser marked a shift, like the ground finally settling after an earthquake. The community's love for Dylan, their unwavering support. For me, it was overwhelming in the best way. The basketball court was officially renamed Dylan's Court, a plaque unveiled with his name, and a quote from his letter, "You're my heart." I cried when they revealed it, not just for the loss, but for the beauty of it all. Dylan was gone, but his legacy was alive in that court, in the scholarship fund, in the stories people kept sharing. But Kathryn wasn't finished. I learned by now, she never would be, not really. She'd gone quiet after the fundraiser, but I knew she was out there plotting, waiting for her next move. I was ready to keep fighting for Dylan's truth, no matter what she threw at me. A month later, I got a call from Sarah at the Delaware Gazette. "Gloria Kathryn's giving an interview," she said, her voice tense. "She's going on television to tell her side." My heart sank. Of course she was. She couldn't let Dylan's truth stand, couldn't let the community's love for him overshadow her narrative. Sarah sent me the details. It was a local morning talk show, one of those programs that thrived on drama. I didn't want to watch, but I had to know what she was saying. I invited Linda and Mark over, and we sat in my living room, the television, on low, my stomach in knots. Kathryn came on, looking polished, her black dress perfect, her voice steady. She told a version of the story that made my blood boil. She said I'd exaggerated the funeral, claimed she'd only asked me to step back because I was overwhelmed. She didn't mention, the letter didn't mention, barring me from the cemetery. Just painted herself as the grieving widow, trying to do right by her husband. Then the host threw a curveball. "We've seen the letter," she said, holding up a copy, her tone sharp. "Dylan's mother says it proves he wanted her there." "What do you say to that?" Kathryn froze, for a split second her composure slipping. Then she recovered. "I don't know about any letter," she said, her voice tight. "Dylan was sick. He wasn't himself. I wanted to scream. Not himself. That letter was Dylan clear as day, every word dripping with his love, his strength." The host pressed her, asked about the handwriting analysis. Dr. Patel had done. Kathryn deflected, said it was irrelevant, that this was about healing, not fighting. The interview ended with her dabbing her eyes. No real tears, just a performance for the cameras. I turned off the television, my hands clenched, my heart racing. Linda was furious. "She's lying through her teeth," she said. Mark just nodded. "She's desperate," he said. "This won't end well for her." The backlash was swift. People flooded the show's social media, calling Kathryn out for her lies. The host even issued a follow-up statement, saying they'd verified the letter's authenticity with Dr. Patel's report. I didn't celebrate, though. I was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of her twisting the truth. I just wanted to live my life, honor Dylan, without her shadow hanging over everything. Mark suggested we sue her for defamation, now that she'd publicly denied the letter on air. I thought about it long and hard, but decided against it. I didn't want to sink to her level. Didn't want to drag this out in courtrooms. I'd won in the ways that mattered. Dylan's truth was out there, his legacy secure in the community's heart. Suing her felt like giving her more power, more attention. I wanted to focus on Dylan, not her. Then something unexpected happened. One of Kathryn's friends reached out to me. Her name was Tara, and she'd been at the funeral, one of the few who'd seen me standing outside the gate like an outcast. She asked to meet, said she had something important to tell me. I was wary, but agreed. We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, her hands wrapped around her mug like she was bracing herself. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice low. I knew what Kathryn did was wrong, but I didn't say anything. I should have. I nodded, waiting for her to go on. Then, she dropped a bombshell. Kathryn knew about the letter, she said. Dylan told her he was writing it. She was furious, said it was a betrayal. I stared at her, my mind racing. Kathryn had known. All this time she'd known, and still barred me, still lied about it. My heart pounded, but I kept my face calm. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Tara looked down. "I can't keep quiet anymore," she said. "She's hurting people. It's not right." Tara handed me a USB drive, said it had emails, conversations between her and Kathryn from before the funeral. I took it home, plugged it into my computer, my hands shaking. The emails were damning. In them, Kathryn admitted she didn't want me at the service, said I'd steal the spotlight from her moment. She even mentioned the letter, said she'd make sure it never saw the light of day. I felt sick, but also validated. This was proof. Undeniable proof of her intentions. I called Mark, showed him the emails. He read them, his jaw tight. "This changes everything," he said. "We can use this. Take her down for good." I wasn't so sure. Part of me wanted to confront Kathryn, show her I knew the truth, march into her perfect life and make her face what she'd done. Part of me just wanted to let it go, to move on with my life. I was torn, but I knew I had to decide. In the end, I chose peace. I didn't go public with. The emails, didn't sue, didn't confront her. I gave the USB drive to Sarah at the Gazette, told her to keep it safe in case Kathryn tried anything else. "If she comes for you again," Sarah said, "we'll use this. But for now, let's focus on Dylan." I agreed. I was done letting Kathryn control the story. I wanted to live for my son, for the love he'd left behind. I threw myself back into the community center, helped with the scholarship fund, volunteered with the kids' programs. I started collecting more stories about Dylan, from people who knew him, scanning photos for a permanent display at Dylan's court. Every step felt like a way to keep him alive, not just for me, but for everyone who loved him. Kathryn moved away a few months later. I heard through a friend that she'd sold the house, packed up, and left Delaware for good. I didn't know where she went, and I didn't care. She'd lost her grip on Dylan's story. Her lies exposed, her control shattered. The emails were my insurance, but I never needed them. The community had spoken. Dylan's truth had won. I felt a quiet victory in that, not loud or flashy, but deep and real. Kathryn was gone, and I could finally breathe. The dedication ceremony for Dylan's court was a day I'll never forget. The community center was packed, the newly renovated court gleaming under the summer sun. Kids were playing basketball, their laughter echoing. Families were eating hot dogs from a food truck. Local musicians played Dylan's favorite songs. I stood at a small podium, my heart full as I looked out at the crowd. "This is for Dylan," I said, my voice steady. "For his heart, his love, his light." I read his letter one last time, the words flowing like they were part of me. "You're my heart," I said, quoting him. "And you all are his." People clapped, some cried, others just nodded like they understood. The plaque was unveiled, Dylan's name shining in the sunlight. It was perfect. After the ceremony, people stayed for hours. They shared stories, left flowers by the plaque, took pictures with the scoreboard. A group of kids asked me to tell them about Dylan, so I sat on the bleachers, told them how he'd taught kids, just like them, to shoot hoops, how he'd never give up on anyone. They listened wide-eyed, promised to keep his court alive with their games. It was healing in a way I can't explain, like Dylan was there smiling down on us. Linda hugged me tight, said, "You did it, Gloria. You gave him this." I nodded, tears in my eyes. "He gave it to me," I said. "His letter started it all." The scholarship fund grew bigger than we dreamed. We awarded the first one that fall to a kid who reminded me of Dylan, kind, stubborn, always helping others. His mom cried when we told her, said it meant the world. The local school named their volunteer award after Dylan too, started giving it out every year to a student who showed his spirit. Every time I heard his name at an event or saw it on a plaque, I felt a mix of pain and pride. He was gone, but he was everywhere, in the best way. I kept volunteering at the community center, became a regular face there. I'd help with homework, coach kids on the court, even started a book club for teens, using some of Dylan's favorite novels. It kept me busy, kept me connected to him. People still sent me stories about him, little things like how he'd helped a coworker move or bought coffee for a stranger. I added them to the display at the court, a growing collection of who he was. The community center manager said it was one of the most visited spots in the building. That meant everything to me. Now I'm 68, still healing, but stronger than I was. Dylan's letter is framed in my living room, a reminder of his love, his fight for me. I visit his court every week, sit on the bleachers, and remember his laugh, his heart. The pain of that day at the cemetery will never fully leave me, but I've found a way to carry it. I've learned that grief is heavy, but love is heavier. And Dylan's love, it's the heaviest thing I carry. It's what keeps me going, keeps me telling his story. I don't know what Kathryn's doing now, and I don't think about her much. She's a shadow that's faded, a fight I've left behind. The community has my back. Dylan's truth is solid, and that's enough. I still get letters from people, sometimes sharing their own stories of loss and resilience. I read every one, answer when I can. It's like Dylan's light is still spreading, touching lives I'll never meet. I keep his letter close, always in my purse or on my nightstand. It's my anchor, my proof that love wins even when it hurts. And it does win. Every time I see a kid shoot a basket on Dylan's court, every time I hear his name, I know it wins. If this story hit you, check out the next one on your screen. Click subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming. Thanks for being here.